Cloud Oaks, our next storyteller, enjoys camping, hiking with friends, her dogs, Kanga and Roo, in the Southwest Desert Lands. In 2014, she earned a master's at Prescott College in art education, but she waited 7 years to move to Prescott. Now she's wondering why. Cloud is a full-time oil painter, and in 2023, she combined her love of art with her love of community and founded the Art Hive, a collective of 27 art studios with a contemporary arts gallery right here in Prescott. Let's
Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my full name is Infinite Cloud Oaks. And I was born in Sedona, Arizona, back in the early 70s. So yeah, you can guess the kind of parents I got to grow up with. And the many fun adventures we got to have. We left Arizona, though, when I was still little and moved to Austin, Texas. But my parents really missed the desert. So every August, they'd pile me and my brothers, Jerome and Catlin, into whatever car we had going on that year and make a trip back across the desert to visit my uncle in California. And we'd camp along the way. This story is about one of those camping trips when my dad saved our lives, but it also changed my brother's perception of cars for the rest of his life. The car of choice that year was a trusty, but slightly rusty, brown on brown Land Cruiser. Now, today it would be a collector's item, but back then I was only 8 or 9 and really didn't care what kind of vehicle we drove, except the Land Cruiser did have an advantage. And that was, I was the oldest, and so occasionally, on road trips especially, I got the privilege to leave the squeeze of the back seat and climb up on top of all the camping gear and the luggage and sit there stretched out by myself and read my Archie comic books for hours. Or just daydream, watching the landscape slip by, counting telephone poles to 100 and then again. So yeah, the trip over to California went just fine. My dad chain smoking across state lines, with his window cracked that required 2 inches. My mom doling out dried apricots and nuts to me and my brother Jerome, teething biscuits for my baby brother, those brown ones that smear everything with that brown stuff that never really comes out. Yeah, the camping trip in California was just really great, but our luck turned on our way back to Texas. Our Land Cruiser, now loaded down with sandy camping gear and really stinky clothes, decided to start spewing billows of black smoke when we're going down the California highway. Yeah, so my dad carefully rolls us to the side of the highway, and we sit quietly while he pops the hood, gets out, stares at the smoking engine, his smoke, the engine smoke intertwined all around him, his red hair billowing out like a halo, cars whizzing by. It didn't look very good. And so the tow ride back to the tow yard was silent and memorable. Us and all of our camping BO piled into the cab of that tow truck and made our way to the neighboring town with all of our belongings, my baby brother's car seat, my Archie comics, my dad's constant road atlas, all bobbing in the Land Cruiser behind us. And when we got to the tow yard, it didn't look very good. Not at all. So my dad begrudgingly traded in his beloved Land Cruiser for a smaller, but running, pea green VW Rabbit. Yeah, it's sat conveniently for sale nearby. So this was the hatchback version, much too small for a family of 5 and all their camping gear. So we were very squeezed for the rest of the trip back to Texas. Me, squeezed in between my 2 brothers, no escape, and no camping gear. My dad gave it all to the guy who sold us the VW Rabbit, declaring, "Our loss is your gain." Now, even at 9, I knew that that was not a straight deal. But I also knew not to speak up, so I stayed quiet. I did notice my mom pilfer a blanket and the food cooler before we left, and I thought that was pretty good planning on her part. So, with all of our belongings and all 3 of us kids squeezed into that tiny back seat, my dad just blasted across the rest of California. And then Nevada was a somber ride of readjustment, smoke curls out of the window, and miles of flat road. We were all hot and tired, and I'm sure way sick of me sitting between my 2 brothers. And we were somewhere around northern Arizona when all of a sudden my dad decided to turn off the highway onto a single-track dirt road that winded its way through the Red Rock canyons and mesas, declaring, "Let's make camp early today. We've had enough excitement." Now, this is not my dad. My dad drives late into the night, and he often stops and we make camp late when it's pitch black, and then wake up early the next morning and get out on the road quick before the traffic picks up. Beating the truckers at the game, he called it. Yeah, but we welcomed this change of mood in my dad, and we hollered and laughed while he took us on a roller coaster ride up one mesa and down another. We cranked down the windows and had a billowing cloud of dust behind it. My dad floored that VW up one gully, down another. It was great fun. But when he decided that that was enough of that game, he parked us up on top of a mesa and declared that the campsite for the night. I'm sure it was just a regular old dried creek bed down below, but to me, it looked like a magic fairyland of red rocks and twisted trees, and I just thought it would be the perfect campsite that night. So we tumbled out of the car, and Mom set to making dinner. Jerome and I went off down into the riverbed to scout for the perfect place to camp. And me being the oldest again, took charge. And I felt that it would be a great idea to build a fort to sleep in that night. So, knowing we had no tent, no sleeping bags, Jerome and I set to work with twisted branches and river rock. We built a great fort, and then we found clumps of old dried tree leaves up on the cliff edge and gathered those for blankets and bedding. We built the best fort. It was so much fun. And that night, as I lay in my leafy bed, my mom and dad sleeping nearby with my baby brother under the one blanket, Jerome and I snuggled in our leaves. I looked up between the branches of our fort at the mass of twinkling stars outside, and I thought, yeah, this is the best camping trip ever. I woke in the middle of the night to my dad yelling, wake up now and run for the rabbit now." What, were we under attack from coyotes? Was it a bear? I didn't know, but I could hear the fear in my dad's voice. And I sat up straight and I listened, and then I heard it. It was a roar coming, and it was getting louder. I didn't know what that roar was, but it sounded really angry and really unforgiving. And I knew I did not want to come face to face with that roar in that darkness. So I hightailed it up that mesa to that VW Rabbit. We all got there just in time to pile in the car right as the sky let loose and the rain started pelting down on us. We turned around and we could see a wall of black water racing into the canyon, totally wiping out where we had just been camping. No sign would ever be there that we had been there. We sat in that Rabbit, rain streaming down the windows, huddled underneath that one blanket for hours. I remember looking and watching my brother's reflection in the window next to me, his forehead pressed up against the window, rain streaming down, making those steam clouds and then wiping it off when it became all clammy, just to see outside, to watch the river rising all around us. We were stranded on an island in the middle of God knows what dark, raging sea. Now, I was nervous and also wondering, what was my dad going to do here? He was amazing, but this? So eventually, my brother falls asleep, and I look up at my dad sitting behind the wheel. I said, hey, Dad, why don't we just drive out of here? Nothing. Crickets. Full inhale and exhale out of that open window, adding to the wetness of it all. And then he says, she may not float. We'll just have to wait till the morning light and find out. Just you sit tight. Well, future therapy will say that that is not the thing to tell an anxious 9-year-old with a lot of time on her hands. But my dad wasn't about to sugarcoat things, and I did appreciate that about him. So I sat and I waited, and I weighed our options. By the time the morning came, I had figured it out. We were going to float like Herbie did in The Love Bug. I was completely convinced, and I was ready to give it a try. But we didn't get going until my mom finally said, I think it's time to give it, whatever it's going to be, a try. My dad turned on the ignition, he rolled up his window, and he sealed us in. So we roll up to that first river crossing, and that brown water is just churning. Water is everywhere. Just getting through the mud to that river crossing was something else. But he rolls up and he eyeballs it like he knows what he's doing. Jerome and I are sitting in the back seat, braced for magic, Herbie magic. And then he starts gunning that engine. He guns that engine and he gets ready, and we're braced in that seat, and I grab my brother's hand tight. And he grabs mine tighter, scrunches up his face because he doesn't want to see what's going to happen. But I want to see. With all my 9-year-old soul, I want to see if we're going to float or what. We hit that bank of water like we were still in that Land Cruiser. Splash of an excitement. But too quickly, way too quickly, it turned into a low-throttled churn. As we lost ground and the water started to rise, branches and debris were hitting our windows, and we were holding our breath. She floats, I cried. My brother echoes, she floats. I'm sure my dad was mumbling a lot underneath his breath, but I didn't care, because to me, we were in the Love Bug, and I was okay. Dad, I cried, Dad, you got this. And I reached up to grab his shoulder, and I noticed he was gripping that steering wheel really tight. And I'm sure he didn't hear my helpful reassurances, because he was waiting. He was waiting to feel the ground back underneath our tires. And there it was. He got it. He declares, she does float. And she floats, we all chanted. And Herbie just tore up the side of that cliff and left a trail of water going up the mountain all the way to the next river crossing. Here we go, my dad yelled every time, and we made river crossing after river crossing all the way back out to the main road, floating every time, with my brother even shouting, she floats, with his eyes wide open. Years later, after telling this story many times around the Thanksgiving table, my dad asked my brother, what kind of car are you going to get with your hard-earned savings? Without hesitation, he answered, a VW Rabbit, of course. And he did. He really did. And he even became a VW mechanic to put himself through grad school. And I heard him many times declare, there's no better car than a VW Rabbit that floats.